morning, and welcome back to another episode of the RedChip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Splitsuit Sweeney, joined as always by Chris Warren. Chris, how you doing today?
Doing good as usual.
Excellent. So today I want to talk about going pro. This is something that we've talked about on the podcast before, but I think it's always worth revisiting and taking kind of a fresh angle at it. So both you and I know you've gone full pro, and you were pro for quite some time. I don't personally consider myself ever having gone full pro. Maybe a little bit in college, but even after graduation, I kind of jumped into playing halftime, coaching halftime, and then writing started creeping in there as well. I don't consider myself a full pro, and I'm curious if you view that differently, and also what your experience has been through the pro side of things.
Yeah, well, I think you wisely sort of noticed the fact that I think there's like this weird distinction of like what is a poker professional, because I think a lot of people would say the purist definition is just you're just completely reliant on your poker winnings, and that's the only definition. If you write a book or do some coverage or the things a lot of sort of well-known pros do, that doesn't count because you're not generating winnings and you're not talking about a livelihood or whatever supported purely from winnings. And I actually think that's I can get with that, because there very much is, I think, a huge difference between someone who just sits down every day and just has to extract enough money to live out of the game, and someone who sort of has their poker winnings as a diversified or more diversified portion of their portfolio, even if they do a lot of other things in poker that make money. So yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a huge difference for that. And for me, there was I'd say about 4 to 5 year period where I was completely reliant on my winnings. I wasn't doing anything else, and that was very different from I don't consider myself a pro now, even though poker makes up a substantial amount of my profit per year. So it's very similar. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a really fair distinction, is kind of the purist angle really is that you are only a pro player if that is all you live and breathe. And like you said, financial basis is completely reliant on poker. And I don't know, I think as we're even looking at what people would consider like pros today, I'm not convinced that as many people are that as maybe they thought a decade ago. Like, I feel like a lot of people who are well known in poker, be them people that are streamers or high-end pros, whatever, have some sort of diversification either inside or outside of poker, and most likely both, rather than relying on poker 100% in terms of like what you win at the tables or what you win in tournaments being their entire financial livelihood. Agree or disagree?
I completely agree. And I actually think there's a reinforcing mechanism in that if you are totally reliant in just poker and poker winnings, you don't want to be well known, right? You don't want it to be you to be out there talking about how good you are and things like that. It's going to make it hard to get into live games, good private games that I think are kind of like the core of many of these type of people's livelihoods. And if you weren't like famous from the poker room, essentially, like no one's going to appreciate you being Mr. Poker Guy, right? So true. Yeah, like absolutely. So if someone is well known and they're getting money from doing coverage and promoting products or whatever it is, like most of the people that they may not qualify for this super purist definition anymore. And I think and the only reason I think the super purist definition makes a lot of sense is that mentally there's a huge difference when you're just completely relying on winning. And I think it's sort of a fair ask, like if you're a student or whatever and you're just like, I just want someone who just like only makes money from winning, it kind of makes sense. Like I can see why that's a credential you would look for. And someone who is sort of battle hardened and that type of thing. It's not, one of the problems is that these days, why wouldn't you be diversified? In fact, I think most people, if you look at their mental makeup, and I found this in myself, even having been a person who did it for 5 years, multiple years, I don't think most people are suited to be a person completely reliant on poker winnings. They would be much happier with other setups or more diversification in their life, because it's not only that if you know, are completely reliant on winnings, what will happen is that your whole life will be built around the fact that you need to win at poker, and that your identity is associated with that, and the things that you know and you can talk about are, you know, other people have jobs and coworkers and projects and things that they might be able to talk about, but it's going to be very hard for sort of quote unquote normal people to relate to someone who just only plays poker and only thinks about poker. And having just more diversity can just open up even like the personal side of your professional life.
I think that's fair. And honestly, when it comes to this, like, I'll step it out even further. I wouldn't even say that that's true just for poker. I'd say that's true universally. If you are 100% reliant on any single thing, just inherently you have to give that all of your time and attention and focus. And what other time and attention and focus do you have to put anywhere else? You don't, because you're reliant solely on that. And I think diversification, I don't know, maybe it's just something that's talked about more. Maybe it's just because I'm older and it's something that I'm thinking about more. Not totally clear on that, but I think it's really, really important to look at diversification. And the purest definition of being a poker player, you know, maybe that suited things better 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. But I don't think nowadays that's the route that I would suggest for pretty much anyone. And I say that pretty much regardless of age, regardless of life situation, no matter how much you love poker. Like, play a ton of it if you love it, by all means, but using it solely for your entire financial well-being, I don't know, I think that's a little concerning.
I can get why it's concerning. I think it's, for me, it's not that it can't be done, obviously, because I did it. And it's not that I would tell anyone not to do it. It's more that I think very few people are going to be mentally set up to do that over a long period of time. Now, if it's like, you know, you don't have much to do, you're in college, you're young, or maybe you're like older and your professional life is more locked in and you're retired, or you could easily go back to a job, you know, then it's like, yeah, if you want to take a year or two, it's like, I don't think, and just play poker, it's not a big deal. But you'd have to be like, you have to be aware of that, like what is happening around. And I have a great anecdote of something that I just noticed from people who were like professionals during the day. And then I remember it happened to me. And I was so locked in to playing poker that, you know, one day I went to the bank and, you know, filled out my check or whatever. And then, you know, the banker hands me the check back and goes, "Sir, it's February. It's not December." And I just had no idea, because I literally was that locked in that every day I would wake up and I just so lost track of time. And I noted, I had other poker pros tell me this, that like, oh yeah, like that's a common anecdote from poker
Sure.
pros. And so, you know, as a 20-year-old with like nothing else to do, that was fine. But I don't think the majority of people are going to end up in a place where like that type of mentality, that type of mindset, which is, I think, required to be completely reliant on winning. It's you know, most people, you know, it's like 87% of people are going to have families and significant others, and like, you may not be that type of person, but you have to kind of be aware of like what's the statistics say, and mapping all that out for yourself. What's good, everybody? I just wanted to jump in and remind you that we have released our RedChip GTO ranges in Pro. So if you are interested in GTO ranges, if you're interested in how do you get started and you're sort of overwhelmed, or you've seen like really complicated ranges before, we've actually gone through the trouble and figured out how to combine these ranges so that you get the right frequencies, but also can basically just play, you know, or fold your hand. You don't have to remember, oh, I'm going to play ace queen suited 50% of the time, or ace jack suited, it's going to be 3-bet 25% of the time. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's much simpler. I think for the only ranges I set it up so that there was some frequency changes was like in the 5-bet shoving, right? And there's just to get accurate enough, that's what had to be done. But even there, you know, I think we may even come out with a way to simplify it. But so please go check it out. redchippoker.com/GTO. I promise it's exciting. It's interesting. We have early access. There's going to be a lot more coming there. So go check it out. If you're interested, let us know. If there's something you want to see, we're actually running solves at the moment, so we can kind of get your input and that type of thing now. We'll have a Discord coming out soon that we can have some discussions on that. But absolutely, please go check redchippoker.com/GTO.
You mentioned earlier that you wouldn't actively tell someone not to. Now, I take the opposite approach. I do tell, just because the person who is well suited to being a 100% full time, long term, only poker pro, I mean, there's so few of them in the first place, and they're not asking for advice normally on should they or should they not. Right? So if you're
Mm,
even like thinking, should I ask someone? Like, the answer is probably like, no, no, you should not be doing that. At minimum, right now. Like you said,
yeah.
it's very, very difficult to do. But I think when we have this conversation and talk about it, I think what's really alluring about being a poker pro is the being your own boss, having 100% control over your time, your schedule, what you do, and ideally how you handle your money. Like, everything is 100% you. And there are some people who are well suited for that, but there are a lot of people who that is this fantasy. And I don't mean that in like a disrespectful way, but like this thing that like they really aspire to have, like full control over every element of their life. And but they've never been their own boss for more than 2 minutes. They've never had to set an alarm in the morning and wake up, and they're only responsible to themselves, and they're going to hold themselves responsible for studying really aggressively and putting in hours when things are going really poorly, because they will go really poorly. And how do you handle all that? And when poker is your sole reliance financially, it can be very, very difficult to find the motivation to put in extra study time, to continue putting in the volume, all of these things, especially when things are going poorly. A bad losing month can really put you in a tailspin. And if you've never had to work through this kind of like self discipline, self motivation, this kind of stuff, it's going to be tough, like real tough.
Yeah, it's definitely not an activity for someone who is worried they might be delusional or not able to have that, not able to make tough decisions for themselves. For sure, it's I definitely do agree that it is one of the most difficult things I think I've ever done, and my life actually got much happier once I did have that diversity in income sources, and was able to kind of come back to poker with a more like balanced approach. And I talked a little bit last week how for me it's very much about the competition that I enjoy now versus it being the main monetary activity that I relied on. And yeah, I do think poker has some very unique elements to it, though. Basically, you can get things from poker that you probably couldn't get from other places. And I think one of the things that happened to me as a younger pro is that because I was so totally focused on this super competitive activity, solving things at a time when no one was solving them, I actually did kind of develop myself in a rather unique way that actually transferred to other aspects of my life. So when I moved on and I started going into consulting, I was able to just demolish a lot of the people around me because, first of all, I thought of it as a competition the same way as poker, which many people didn't. And when it came to when I was in these meetings and pitching consulting projects and things like that, I just kind of would like read the room, and eventually I just found myself, I don't even remember when it happened, I would just be like, okay, so if you give us $50K a month, we'll do this project. And the people around me, that doesn't sound crazy, but like the people around me were like, how did you know to ask them for $50,000 a month? I was just like, oh well, they liked us, and like I didn't want to go too low and just all that sort of competitive like instinct, being super focused, super dialed in a high pressure situation, that came with me when I went to poker. Have you had similar things to that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, in business, it's left, right, and center, but even in relationships, just being able to read things better and understand strategically how to war game things both in real time and between sessions, and calling relationship sessions, but in the dating phase, it sort of is. Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff comes with you, and that's what I've always loved about poker and will continue to love about poker forever, is just the immense skill set you have to have, and once you gain it, you bring it with you wherever you go. Now, that being said, you can still bring things from your other parts of your life into poker, right? So it's always possible to go that way as well. But, if you're spending a little bit of time getting better with poker, those skill sets translate in a lot of different areas, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I think my entire professional life really is kind of based around the fact that I started off being a poker pro and the mentality that I developed there, and it shaped up in good ways and probably uh, ways that have been more challenging. But one of the things that I very much noticed that happened was just that having that relying on myself mentality, not needing my hand held, happy to jump in and figure something out, all the skills you kind of need to be successful at poker, all those things really did translate. And I think one of the other things that people don't talk about is that poker is an amazing networking opportunity. It's I've met probably the large majority of interesting people in my life, mostly from poker. And we're talking about someone, when I went into consulting, I ended up sort of flying around the world and getting in a few boardrooms and meeting some pretty cool people. But poker was just a different echelon. When even if you're sitting at like a Vegas 2-5 game, you meet some wild people and they get to have this sort of personal experience with you. And I've just had so many interesting relationships develop off the back of being on the poker table and how you present yourself. And yeah, it's just very interesting. And I think that can be especially valuable for someone who's maybe outside the box, that maybe you don't have sort of the traditional elements that people would look at for, doing a business deal with or whatever it is. It can be an extremely valuable opportunity to be at the poker table with someone, with people who have money, people who, you know, are willing to probably think outside the box because they tend to play poker. There's something to that. And there's sort of this crew of like you said, like independent minded people that you can meet through poker that can absolutely impact the businesses and the relationships you have outside of poker.
It's 100% true. I've had some very, very, I don't want to call them weird, but very, very atypical business conversations at the table and networking things. And you're right. I've had it happen at 1-2. I've had it happen at 2-5. It doesn't just happen at 5-10 plus. And just people from all over come to this game. It gives us something already to be focused on and talk about at the table. And things just expand into networking opportunities from there. And one of the things that I really kind of like about live poker, obviously online doesn't really offer it, is the fact that it kind of forced me to snap some of my super, super introverted qualities. Like I had to be able to talk at the table. I have to be able to conversate. And there's not that many people to conversate with, which is nice, right? Maximum 10 others. But just getting that skill set too, and poker really forced me to start getting that. And I'm still not great by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm far better than I was, say, I don't know, 15 years ago. It is really, really lovely rather than just being online and it's just you in your underwear playing on clicking the mouse a bunch, and that's not yeah, not great for networking, but live offers that for sure.
It's a powerful thing. And I think it just kind of, one of the things I would say if someone's really asking this question is like, should I go pro, is like, you really have to think about who you are, right? So first and foremost is just like, how much money are you going to need the game to produce? And number two, I would say, is probably just, are you younger or are you older? And so if you're younger, like these opportunities like learning and transferable skills and networking, they may have a lot of value to you, right? And I think this is something I've seen for successful people that I've noticed in general, is that a lot of them tend to have sort of like this Kickstarter career where it's like, I'm thinking of one person who was a professional volleyball player, and they just get really, really into this one thing. They go really hard on this one thing, and it basically is not financially successful for them. But they kind of develop that mentality, that, that killer, that hunter, like they know how to do something difficult. And developing that early on, I think, is just an incredibly valuable thing. So it's, as a younger person, I think poker has an immense potential to offer you things there. Now, if you're older, though, it's a very different equation. And I think you wouldn't really care as much about the learning and the transferable skills. And you'd probably be more looking at just like probably ways to spend time, right? Because one of the things I've noticed with the older people that I've played with is that, if they can go to the poker table instead of, doing some other sort of gambling or going drinking or all the ways that people sort of spend time, and they just really enjoy poker and they enjoy being in the card room and chatting with their buddies at the table, getting to know everyone, having a little bit of a social circle of people that you see on a regular basis. They tend to value those things more, and it can be nice for them to just be like, well, I would have gone out to a restaurant tonight, or I would have been spending money that tonight, but instead I'm making $20 an hour, or I'm making $50 an hour. Like, that is a very, very powerful thing to do. And if you're able to convert maybe some of your hobby time or some of your entertainment time into a profitable activity, especially if someone's retired and on a budget, that's also super powerful. So
I guess let's start with the younger, because I kind of view this as like three different age groups. Let's say young, which is probably around college age. Let's say middle age, and let's say older, retirement age. So with the younger, the college age person, these are oftentimes the people that come to me and are saying like, I'd love to play GoPro one day. Like, that's kind of what I'm aspiring to at the moment. And you said you feel there's value for them becoming a poker pro right this moment. I don't disagree with that. I think there's a lot of value in picking up all these skills. Like we talked about, they're transferable in lots of different areas and for the rest of your life. So learning them early is great. However, when you're young and you have the most amount of time, the least amount of responsibilities, and the most amount of energy, I'm just not sure that plunking 2 years of your life into playing pro is necessarily the best idea. I think having some sort of entrepreneurial thing on the side and then playing a lot of poker is probably fine, like a half and half. But I'm very, very nervous about making the suggestion for the college age person just because I think it's so easy to let things get out of control, get your balance out of whack. Then you're probably not taking dating all that seriously, or you're taking it really, really seriously. It depends how you look at it, I suppose. Nothing's wrong with either of those choices, but like understanding what your life goals are and then creating a path for that, rather than just it's really alluring to be a poker pro and as such I'm going to do that. And this might seem ridiculous, right? I mean, we run a poker training site, and lots of people aspire to this. They buy training to become a pro at some point or aspire to it. And I'm making the suggestion that they don't go pro. But again, I think having a better life balance and still playing a lot of poker, if you really enjoy it and you're making a good chunk of money, why the heck not? But I think pure, if it's your only financial income, I don't know. I have a very difficult time giving that piece of advice, just like I have a difficult time giving that advice for like other things. Like, I don't think there are some people that are anywhere near suited to be a full-time entrepreneur. So, develop a side hustle and keep your 9 to 5, or start working a part-time job and working on a side hustle. Again, that diversification I think is becoming more and more important. And I don't want to see people, especially younger, college, whether you're dropping out or you're graduated, like really waste those early years in your 20s where you just have so much energy, so much potential, and to burn it in the wrong thing, that sucks.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with you on, and it's several ways. I would say number one, I think that it's very difficult to understand yourself when you're young. I know I didn't.
Sure.
And that's one of the biggest challenges is if you were to go to poker, it's like you actually may not know what you want out of life, what you want. And if you do go pro for 2 years, you're making a pretty significant decision. So that's a huge risk. So I very much agree on that front. However, I know for me, when I did that, like I did get a lot of the details wrong, and it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. And I will also say, even during the poker boom, the amount of people who I saw have problems managing being a professional, doing crazy things, blowing money, absurd amounts of money, just generally like, well, even for me, I went broke, not from poker, but from just the external things that I was doing. And I would qualify myself as an extremely cautious person while I was doing all that, even though I made some pretty wild decisions. And now my financial savvy has had time to play out and there's no money concerns, but at the time it was an intense. But so it's like, yeah, on one front I kind of agree, but on the other front I would say is I think there's a misperception of like what young people can do. For example, college I think is a pretty terrible return on investment at the moment.
Agreed.
It depends. There's certainly people who benefited a lot. There's actually college programs that I've worked with to market that I think are very beneficial and good and have good values. But there's an immense potential with the college market, I think, to be scammed, essentially, where you're sold a bill of goods that kind of isn't applicable in the real world, or things have moved on so rapidly that what's the point in getting a degree? And, for example, actually, between you and me, like James actually has a marketing degree and I do not. But I've been a professional marketer for a decade, and James markets his business, so he's not no slouch either. But I don't think there's any difference, I would say, between, and in fact, in a lot of ways, I probably got more experience than you by going out and doing consulting for all these, Fortune 500 companies and flying around the world to do that. If you compared, it wasn't really like the difference there. You just started your business after college. But if you had started your business earlier, I suspect you would have been better off than you would have been finishing your college degree. Do you think so?
Oh, 100% agreed. I was going to say, I don't think you missed any opportunities by not having the degree that I have. And yeah. My son and I actually, so he's 16, turning 17 soon. We're recording a podcast episode together, he and I, and we're talking about whether or not college is a good investment. And unless you like need it, like if you need the degree, like if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or something that like requires it, sure. But if you're not doing that, I can think of a lot of different ways to spend that money and spend 4 years of my life than setting it on fire for a degree that probably doesn't mean too much by the time you finally get it. Right? You could have spent 6 months and probably learned all that I learned in 4 years.
Yeah. It's really setting the tone to rile some people up with setting the money on fire.
Yeah, my bad. Hey, as someone who spent way too much money in college, maybe I'm biased because I'm jaded by that. That's fine. We could totally have that conversation. But I think for most people, spend a quarter of what you'd spend on college, spend a quarter of that time, and you're going to learn a tremendous amount more, almost guaranteed, if you have any self-discipline and self-motivation.
Yeah, I think I actually view college in a very similar light to poker. It's that this is a pretty significant decision. The people going into 50, 100, 150, I've heard more. Actually, there's a large contingent in the country that are essentially $1 million in debt because they have a weirdly structured loan for their...
Jeez.
Yeah, and they didn't start earning enough immediately after. It's like people underestimate how significant that college decision is because it's socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. And I think both poker and college kind of sit in that frame over there. It's like you're young and this is a huge decision. And the cool thing about poker, I would say, not to talk it up more, but if you go broke in poker, which I saw many people do, right? Almost every pro I know went broke, basically. You only lose what you have for the most part. Some people kind of went in debt, but it would be in debt to people as opposed to non-disclosable debt to the federal government or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But when you go in debt for poker, for college, that sticks. A lot of it you can't cancel out no matter what you do, and those decisions they're very significant and they're asked of you at a very young age, and it's like you don't have enough information to make that decision. So. Yeah, I think you're right. In a way, it's kind of good to dissuade people from going pro because the people who will do it anyways. And that's how I was. There was no way anyone, in fact, everyone tried to talk me out of it. And I was just like, nope, this is happening.
Yeah.
Was the same for you?
In terms of trying to talk you out of going pro?
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever try to talk you out of going pro.
Oh, not like you and I, but family or
Oh, yeah. So I actually wanted to drop out of college. I wanted to drop out after my freshman year, and I wanted to drop out between my junior and senior year. and talked to my parents about it, and they were just not supportive in the slightest. And I was just young, and I listened to my parents too much, and
Mm.
just finished the degree and was playing cards in college, so fine. But I saw, I really did see early on the Wild West opportunity that was online poker at that point. I'm like, I don't know how long this window is going to be open, but and to be totally fair, let's just say that I did drop out, and let's just say that I did make a couple million. Doesn't necessarily mean I'd still have a couple million in my pocket today. Like,
Correct.
very, very realistic chance that I blow it, half being stupid and half being stupid. And it just is what it is. So I try not to beat myself up one way or the other for it, but it was a massive opportunity then. And, that's the great thing about poker. You just never know when the new, like, boom is going to happen, be it mini or huge. And there's tons of those little opportunities, be it in other games like the popularity of PLO popping off and other things. I don't know. I try not to look at those years in a positive or a negative. They just were what they were. I do want to add one thing to your point though, because I think it's actually a very fair point. So if you're younger, let's just say that you're getting near graduating college, and if you're looking at what you could do in that time, let's just say over an 18-month period, if your options are between going pro in poker for those 18 months or getting a job at Best Buy for 18 months and
Mm.
really doing nothing else other than just hanging out with friends and stuff, I do agree there's a lot more value in putting in 18 months as a poker pro. 100%. As long as you're not going to like completely murder your financial and you have some sort of support and stability and you have some sort of self-discipline and self-motivation, I can definitely agree with that, because what you'll learn in that 18 months is far more than plugging 40 hours a week at Best Buy and chilling out with your friends after that. So it really is like, look at what your opportunities are right this moment, and you have tons of them. And that's part of the tricky thing when it comes to choosing a path, especially for a year or two, or even longer than that. It's difficult because you do have so many options at your disposal, but be realistic about what your self motivation looks like, what your self discipline looks like, and don't put yourself in a situation where you could easily clobber your life, or worse, waste it. Because I think
Mm.
that's one of the issues at that age is you waste it at a job you hate, and you do nothing else for self betterment outside of that, and then you're in a really dumpy situation come 2, 5, 10 years later.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is you kind of have to compare what else you would be doing. It's like, yeah, I would be definitely more inclined to push someone with without other, and it can just be interests. I would say it's like
Yeah.
if you're really obsessed with poker, and like you're struggling to like do. This is what it was for me. It was like, okay, I would go to class, and I remember one of the most entertaining ones is that while I was like on the cutting edge of heads up tournaments, and I was like writing theories and solving the game along with some others on 2+2, I was getting the worst grade I ever got. I think college was like a B minus in statistics. And it was like, I thought it was funny because it was like I was really engaged too. Like I would go to every class, I would ask tons of questions. I was really invested in getting better at statistics because I knew it would transfer, but I just didn't care about the like actually like taking the test and getting a good grade in the test. I just actually wanted to learn statistics so I could use it.
Yep.
And yeah, it was just such a funny comparison where I was like on the cutting edge of, I think, what real true statistics were kind of like playing out and what we were learning, and real data science and things that have played out very favorably in my career and moving forward from that point, and the actual like what it took to be successful academically. So yeah, for me I wasn't going to be successful academically, even though I was quite talented at it, and I probably would have had theoretically this long list of options of things that I could do. I was just obsessed with poker, and that was it. And there was nothing that could be done. Like I could have forced myself to do something else, but I wouldn't have been as successful because I couldn't wrap up this poker. I would have still been playing, after on the side or wherever, and that was what I was interested in. And so I think I got more benefit by going deeper, going full, even though actually like I didn't really, from that first period of my poker career, I made lots of money and I just wasted it outside of poker. Well, not wasted it, but didn't manage skillfully as I do now. That experience made, like, because I gave it my all, because I was so fully invested in it, that's really what I took away from it. And so even though I didn't take away the money per se, which, I mean, so many poker pros have this story, or like they had to go into a second round of their career before they really made the money. Even though I didn't take away that money, I still took away immense amount. And I literally went into corporate, and I don't know what your impression of James was, but I just like flew up the ladder. Like, it wasn't even hard. It was just like, I was like this battle ready, skillful, talented, strategic, measure, like, and just able to bring this immense amount of effort. And I just like, it was just it felt trivially easy to succeed in business for me at that point.
Definitely looked like that from the outside for sure. And so, like, I just want to say one more thing to that point, to kind of you being in stats class and going through that, is you did make the decision to go pro for a good chunk of years. And all of the things you were doing before that, or I suppose maybe during that, was things that would support you making that decision, right? You were putting time into the study, and like serious time and attention. You were playing a lot. You were thinking a lot. You were working on your mindset a lot. And you were doing all of the things that would say, okay, this is probably more of an intelligent decision for Chris than it is for the person who's played 500 hands of poker in their life and doesn't really have much financial skill set, self-motivation skill set, etc. So it really is like, when people come and just like send an email to me, which I probably get way more often than I care to admit, of like, hey, I want to go pro, what do you suggest? I'm like, well, you've given me no information, and chances are, if this is the way that you're opening this conversation with me, I mean, I can't imagine you're thinking about the game that deeply. And no disrespect, but like, you probably just aren't well suited at the moment to go pro. So don't stress about that. Stress about learning the game, enjoying the game more, and if the opportunity arises, then by all means. But there are things that people show when they're ready to even entertain the idea of going pro, rather than it just being like, I want to, or it looks fun. Well, sure, lots of things look fun, but doesn't necessarily mean it's right for you.
Yeah, that is such a perfect way to describe it. I actually am thinking back to what was actually happening the time that when I actually went pro. And basically what happened is I actually hadn't, I don't even think I had been thinking about whether to drop out or not. I had similar pressure to James. It was just, the family had decided, like, this is, college is good for you. Don't think about it, just do it. And so that's what I was doing. I would go to college, I'd have a little bit of time partying, and then every other waking moment I would spend on poker. And that was just my life. And basically what happened is because I was spending so much time in poker, like on James's couch or pestering him with questions or trying to train heads up or whatever it was, it started to get difficult to manage the rest of my life. And literally the moment I went pro, I was playing poker all day, had a great day, and I had like this big paper due, and I sat, I was like, okay, I did the usual thing, like I'll start it at 7 p.m. and then I was like, I'll start it at 8 p.m. And I'm just procrastinating writing this paper. And I think I procrastinated till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or something ridiculous. And, I just was like sitting there at 3 a.m. and then I was just like, this is so stupid. Why am I stressed about this paper? Like, I just made, a couple $1,000s today. Like, and I was just like, I was deeply, deeply upset at this paper that I had to write. I was just like, this is so stupid. And I was just so angry, and like, I just didn't want to do it. It probably would have taken me like an hour. It wasn't even like a huge deal. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to write this stupid paper. I don't feel like it. I don't want to do it right now. Which was, for me, I know a lot of people maybe don't think that blowing it off, but for me, I was like an A student, did everything I was told, not delivering on the deadline that I had for tomorrow for my paper was a big deal. And literally that was the moment I went pro, because it was just like, yeah, I'm not doing this. and I don't want to do this. And I didn't even know. It was so funny. I actually ended up going to talk to one of the school counselors, and I was just like, ranting him about how angry I was about like having to write this paper. And he's like, look, do you want to be in college? And I was like, fuck no. And he was like, well, then don't. And I was just like, what?
That's an
And so it
option.
was like, it's so funny. I didn't even realize I was going pro. I was essentially told like, okay, you're choosing a life path that isn't this.
Exactly. And you had taken all those steps before that and had the internal conversations, and maybe not as explicitly as you probably would have if you were the age you are now back then, but it just is what it is. But they were like the action sets that correlated with you making that decision, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But I know we're running a little long in the conversation, but I want to kind of touch on those other two age groups because I think we've talked a lot about the younger, more college age folk. Middle age, I find it difficult to ever find a yes at this age in terms of should you go pro. I really, assuming that you are married, assuming that you have kids, I just can't imagine having poker being, and again, we're really emphasizing the sole financial income, right? So it's not like you have other things going on. You got a side hustle that's doing something. You have some investments that are giving you enough in terms of monthly to cover your nut, and poker is just kind of something on top. Like, we're talking about fully, solely your income stream. I have a very difficult time suggesting that people do that for any more than a year in middle age. What are your thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I guess I just have a hard time coming at it from it's your soul. Like that's the only definition of pro. Where I do appreciate people like that distinction. That if someone does that, that is a very difficult thing to do, and it is a nice thing to know about them.
Yep.
But I think the overwhelming majority of people that I've met in poker who make serious money at poker, they do have some diversification. And for me, like I actually think middle-aged people are often more set up to do it because they have the professional skills. Their lives are less chaotic. They're more stable. They'll know whether or not it will fit into their life or not more easily than a young person. A young person, I think you can often end up doing almost anything, regardless of how, well suited it would be to you. Whereas someone middle aged, it's like if your wife is going to hate the fact that you play, or your significant other is going to hate the fact that you play, that's a huge negative, and you're going to know that. And I will say, the overwhelming majority of people who I see make a lot of money from poker are non-traditional. They go to the beat of their own drum to some degree, and it comes out in other areas in their life, whether it's they're kind of like a lone wolf type person, or they have an atypical relationship with a lot of independence, or they're maybe like a financial freedom oriented person where they're very diligent about their state. Like those are the type of people who I find tend to have the most enjoyment out of a poker career, and it being a serious professional activity for them in their life, versus like the person who's just like, I'm gonna like leave my job and like still go I'll still go hang out at the bar on the weekends, or what. Like those type of people I think will tend to struggle the most, because they sort of need that socially connected, normal feeling life. Whereas for like if you look at me, like I have zero concern as an older person, as the older version of Chris, for what my life looks like to anyone, what anyone thinks about my life. Even as a young person, when I actually did care a lot more, like I still would make decisions that like everyone disliked and would recommend I didn't do. So that was kind of always the basis for me. It was just like, I'm going to make the decision. You're not going to make the decision. It's my effing life. So I think that is something I can say to look for, is that like, if you need that socially connected life, and, we were laughing before we started the podcast about how like, when you're annoyed, if you're annoyed when someone tells you like, oh, this one time I had aces and they got cracked, and like, you're going to hear that story a million times. If you're the type of person that's going to bother, like, it's going to be a tough path for you to be a poker pro.
Yeah, and if you're gonna feel pressure talking about it, right? If you don't feel comfortable telling your family, if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation with a banker, if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation at a party, I mean, if you feel uncomfortable about that's kind of one of your flags right there. You really want to be very confident in this decision. Now, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And again, if we're making the purest distinction of pro, I still say no. However,
Mm.
if, well, no, most of the time. If we're taking the non purist, right, where you do have income diversification, you have a different setup. And I agree with you. You know, if you're in your 30s or 40s and you want to take a year or two off of your professional path, assuming you're not in like a very, very specialized path, I think that could definitely work. But it's the soul, the purest definition that I get really really hung up on, and I think is worth really clarifying. There are plenty of
Yep.
situations where you have other financial income streams, and yeah, that could definitely work, assuming of course that you're ready for it. I see sometimes people that are in their 30s or 40s and they're, maybe hitting midlife crisis, maybe not, but it's kind of that like contrarian, F this, I've worked for someone my entire life, all my bosses suck, and F it, I'm just going to do this and go play poker professionally. Well, again, if you're coming at it from like an immature F somebody point of view, chances are you're already looking at it the wrong way, and I'd say your probability of success is going to be far lower. So,
Mm.
be like you said, when you are in the middle age group, chances are you do know yourself better. And if you don't, it's really time to get started on that. But if you know yourself better, you understand what the situation is, you've had the mature conversations with the people around you, and you have the full support and you're ready to rock and roll and you can afford to do so, cool. Just be very careful if you've never been your own boss before. I'd say that's one of the biggest things. And it's very difficult, regardless of what age you are, to be your own boss. Because, especially with poker, because poker is one of the rare professions where you can have a losing day.
Yep.
You go to the office, I don't believe you're ever going to have a losing day at the office. You go play cards, that can happen. If you're a day trader, sure, that can also happen. But for most things, you have this kind of consistent income. And having inconsistent income where you can have losing days, weeks, months, years, I mean, be really honest with yourself. How are you going to react in that situation? Are you going to fly off the handle? Are you really angry when you incur losses right this moment? If yes, are you putting in time and effort to fix that? Because if that's a large chunk of your income and there's a lot of stress and pressure on your head because of it, that's that you're setting yourself up for a really, really rough path. Really rough.
Yeah, I very much agree with you everything you said there. I would say one of the things I've noticed, and this isn't to dissuade anyone, but like you said, if you're the type of person who has like maintained a job for 5, 10 years, with even if you didn't like it, you were able to show up every day, be responsible, be moderately accountable and successful, so you weren't let go. Like there's a massive inverse correlation to you being able to be a poker pro, I would say, just because you're getting enough out of that you didn't implode that. And I think a lot of the people I saw who were successful at poker, a lot of them had very non-traditional jobs, or like were their own boss, or like, yeah, maybe they worked for a corporation but they just like ran this project off in the corner and everyone left them alone. Like there was something weird about the way their career was, and they weren't suited to like working in a team and reporting to a boss. And if you tried to make them do that, it wouldn't happen. And that's kind of the way it was for me, even though I did have a pretty elaborate corporate career. Like I literally couldn't make it work for longer than like 18 months. Just like at a certain point, it would just be like this overwhelming pressure to just like get out on my own, do something else, like get away from it. Um, and I've seen that tendency. So yeah, it's like there is like it's really valuable for someone who really needs the independence and that who isn't suited to doing stable normal things. I think there just is an element of that. And yeah, if you just worked a job for 10 years and it was like, okay, like you may not like it, but like poker can have some brutal elements. And if you don't value the independence, you may not have the same drive as someone who's just like, well, you know, it's either this or like putting a bullet in my head because I'm not reporting to the boss again. Like, like that's kind of the mentality of a lot of people. Or
Yep.
they did something really, really successful elsewhere. Like there is like the MIT type guy who just like does it for fun on the side, or just like, it's like an interesting intellectual activity and they end up going hard on it for a couple of years. Like that happens too.
Yep.
But something non-traditional, I would say, is a huge light bulb in the direction of being pro.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And it's actually funny. So we're talking about people going from job to pro. When I look at the opposite, people that were really, really successful early on in poker and where they are after they transitioned out of poker and went into a job, I can't think of very many that went like a traditional job. Almost all
Mm.
of them went some sort of entrepreneurial route or some really weird niche thing that they were just kind of able to like do for themselves. A lot went into trading. I you just don't see, like, again, what made them suited for that early means they're probably not well suited for getting into a 20-year consistent job where they plug in and they just fit right back into the system. I don't think it works that way.
Very much agreed.
Yep. All right, so we talked about the young, we talked about the middle. Let's talk about the retirement age. So this is one where I can actually be a little more bullish. So not if you are not if we're using the purist definition. Again, by the purist definition, I don't think it works very well unless you're young and you can kind of bounce back off of it. I would not I can't imagine being like 60 years old and using the purest definition of pro going pro poker. I just
Mm.
for like 100 and a half different reasons I can't think of that being a good thing. But if we're using the non-purist definition and you maybe have some sort of passive income coming through or investments that you've made over time that you're getting some sort of draw off those, I see a lot of benefit in playing a lot of poker at that point. If nothing else, because you keep using your brain. You hear so many stories of people that hit retirement and then within like 2 years, their brain is just ice cream because they just stop using it.
Yeah.
And they just weren't interested in anything other than just mindless stuff and maybe watching TV or whatever, but their brain is just putty after a couple years. You really got to continue using that big old muscle in your head, and if you don't, that's not great. And I think poker can be one of those great things that you, one, get to do that, and then two, can turn profit off that. You also throw socialization into the mix, and that can be good, especially as you're getting older and more people around you are dying left, right, and center. Could see a lot more benefit
Going
to
real
that.
dark.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go dark. Sorry, I lost my grandpa earlier this year, so it is kind of top of mind. Plus, Corona year and all that. So, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's good for anyone who needs a competitive outlet and would benefit from the money. And honestly, like I think, like you said, it's poker is actually it's always pretty tough. Even when you're really good at the game and you're in a game that you're better than, it's always really tough. It'll keep you engaged. So, for people who like are looking for something like that and have space for something like that in their life, you know, going non-purist from them, and I think that's when I'm really positive about someone who will take it seriously, who likes the challenge, likes needing something to do, needing the effort. Um, that's when poker's at its best. And I think there's this whole world of like having it be a serious activity in your life, but not being the only thing that you need to do to make money. That I think that is where the overwhelming majority of people will end up and will be happiest at.
Yep.
Because like you said, it's so difficult when you put in a full day's work, a nice 8-hour day, nice, and you put all your effort into it and you just lost several $1,000s. Like that is such a difficult thing to mentally process. And you may have experienced that once, but when you have that happen to you every month, multiple times, it's like, it's hard to underestimate how much that can affect you. But for me these days, it's like, when I have a bad run, it's like, whatever, like still up on the month, who cares?
Yeah.
And I know I'm up on the year, and it's like, it doesn't stress me out nearly to the degree when I was like, it was like going to sleep at night, being down like 5, 10, 20K or something like that. It was you can't help but think about it.
Yeah.
You know, just weighs on you.
Oh, and you start having that conversation with yourself of like, all right, well, how many more days of this can I handle? And not just mentally, but like financially, how many more of these can I handle? Okay, do I need to consider getting a backer at any point if I have, say, another week of this? And then your confidence can just tank. And, eh, you know, we talk a lot about strategy on the podcast and talk a decent amount about mindset stuff, but to go pro, purest definition or not, like you have to be mentally tough. Like you have to have
Yes.
grit. You have to be able to work through this. And if you can't handle, say, a losing month right now, assuming you're not pro at the moment, like don't even entertain the idea of going pro until you can handle a losing month when it's not your main source of income.
Yeah.
Because if you've never experienced that before, it's something else. It really is. So yeah, I mean, like always, keep working on strategy, keep working on mindset, and when it comes to going pro, it's a lot of ups, a lot of downs, but and also a lot of things to consider. It's right for some people, for most people, maybe not. But having poker as a profitable hobby is wonderful. Doesn't mean you need to make it your sole source of income, though. But if it is right for you, then we wish you the absolute best of luck with it. And if you are pro at the moment, be it fitting one of the definitions we talked about in this episode or maybe something different, hit us up on social. Let us know what it's been like for you, what your experience has been with it, pros, cons, and any advice you'd give to your younger self or anyone else who is in the position that you once were. Let us know what it's like for you. I'd love to hear where you guys are at with things.
One final reminder before we go. Again, we have our early access GTO ranges live in pro right now. Go check it out. It's $50 a month, for GTO ranges that honestly would probably cost you several $100s. And you can't even buy the type of interpretation and simplification that I've done on these ranges. So please go check it out. redchippoker.com/GTO.